आदाब और it's a great pleasure for me, in fact, to be moderating a session on a wonderful novel by H.M. Naqvi, which is called The Selected Works of Abdullah the Cossack. H.M. Naqvi, of course, was vague about where he was born and where he's lived. So I would say somewhere, here, there, and everywhere. He's a great novelist whose first novel, The Homeboy, was published to great critical acclaim and won the DSC Prize for South Asian Literature, and also had some rave reviews and makes for great reading. H.M. has also taught creative writing at Boston University and LUMS. So, the selected works of Abdullah the Cossack, here's the book. Now, usually they say, don't judge a book by its cover. Please judge the book by its cover, because it's every bit as wonderful and riotous and thought-provoking and maddening as the cover. So, we've done with the cover, and it's a very, very interesting novel. I'll let you into a personal secret, which is that unless a book grabs me, by the first 9 or 10 pages, I put it down and I forget about it because life is absolutely too short. And I would much rather go back to a much-loved older book. But I had a terrible problem when I started reading Abdullah the Cossack a few weeks ago in Karachi, because unceremoniously it was taken away from me and I had to return it. And I was dying to know what happens. Of course, I'm not going to spill any beans. I won't give you the spoilers. I won't tell you what happens. But it's unputdownable. Absolutely unputdownable. And it also is literature in progress as rebellion and subversion. Because what H.M. does here is he actually plays with the genre of the novel. As it says, it's a chronicle. But before I, turn to Christopher, who is, of course, a writer and an author of 6 books of poetry and prose, and nurtures the International Writing Program at the University of Iowa, I'm going to ask H.M., please, if you could read something from the book for us. Do you want to speak into mic? It's working.
Thank you. Ladies and gentlemen, the selected works of Abdullah the Cossack features a 300-pound bachelor's, a scion of a erstwhile business family that has fallen on hard times and wakes up one day realizing he's turned into a septuagenarian. And with that realization comes the corollary that he's led a fallow life, a life without meaning. And except for monographs and essays and notes, there's nothing much more that has sustained him. And so the story begins something like this. My head is like a rubbish heap. You have to sift through the muck to find a working toaster. When I was 11, I overheard one of my brothers telling another that I am a bastard. They say if you scale the bluff at Shah Nurani, you happen upon the clenched mouth of a cave, and if you manage to crawl in, you are your father's son. I do not patronize Shah Nurani. If I'm a bastard, I'm a bastard. But you might find me at the seaside shrine of Abdullah Shah Ghazi on a Thursday night, inhaling hashish among the malcontents who congregate on the rocky southern slant of the hill. It's always a carnival populated by fortune tellers, bodybuilders, thugs, troubadours, transvestites, women and sweet, rowdy children. I am at home there. When I enter the cool confines of Agha's supermarket to purchase smoked Gouda, however, shoppers part to give me way. Those who once knew me turn to memorize the sodium content in shelved cans of French onion soup. The last time I was dragging myself through the aisles, I called out to this busty 66-year-old Persian cat who had just celebrated her 55th birthday. Although married to a portly patrician now, she would be at the Olympus in the old days, making eyes at the young men with carnations fixed in their lapels. When I hooted "Sweetie," she paused for a moment as if crossing off the loaf of bread on the list in her head, before disappearing around the corner from the shoe polish. Verily, decency is dead or dying. I have been mulling a project, some permutation of the mytho-poetic legacy of Abdullah Shah Ghazi since the fateful day my father asked me to punctuate the following sentence. That is that, and that is not, that is not. Naturally, I retorted, comma after the 6th word, sir. Papa could be difficult, but I knew then that he had in an indirect way communicated his aspiration for me to be a phenomenologist, even if he would deny it vehemently afterwards. There is no doubt in my mind that my mother, an aristocrat hailing from an erstwhile martial state in the north, would have encouraged the project. When she entered a room, people squinted as if she were wrought of light. If I close my eyes, I can recall hers, sunny and blue like the sea at Sumniani. Married to a cousin at 17, the Khan of this or that Khanate, she ran away when she realized he was only keen on hunting partridge. She met Papa at the Olympus in 29 when visiting an aunt twice removed for high tea. She had 5 sons with rhyming names: Hidayatullah, Bakaullah, Abdullah, Fazlullah, aka Tony, and Rahimullah, aka Babu. When Mummy passed, the family, the house of K, became fundamentally unglued. After retiring from the army as a major, Hidayatullah moved to a palatial residence in the suburbs featuring a diamond-shaped pool, while Bakaullah, once a card-carrying communist, emigrated to some dusty corner of the Near East where he reportedly runs a transportation and logistics concern. Tony, my boon companion, left for university in the United States of America before squatting on our estate in Sindh, where he cultivates dames and produces wine, our very own vinos de la tierra. I'm certain I was Mummy's favorite. She raised me to be myself. I'm not a bad man, but not good for much anymore. I am a fat man and an anxious one. The insides of my thighs chafe when I climb down the stairs from my quarters. I avoid loitering downstairs because my youngest brother Babu occupies the mezzanine with his twin boys and plain moon-faced wife Nargis. Alas, with all the charm of an opossum. The arrangement poses a bit of a problem because I love the children, those crazy little childus. When they manage to break free, they sneak up on me like those ninja warriors and clamber atop my dome belly. We sink, avort, creep up to the roof to observe the silently sundering clouds, the odd meteor. We startle the nesting crows and put the fear of God in their black hearts. When their rasping protests ring through the still of the evening, Nargis the opossum comes bounding up the stairs. She does not approve and changes the rules all the time. Rule number 1, no taking the children to the roof at night or during the day, the afternoon, or at sunset. Rule number 2, no feeding the children walnuts or custard apples, chili chips, sugar wafers. Rule number 3, no singing Tom Jones to the children or Cliff Richard, Boney M, the Benjamin sisters. And even though I cradled him in my arms, carried him on my shoulders, even though I taught him how to whistle, how to say thank you, thanku, he said, the aforementioned Babu is not an ally. Many years ago he laughed when told I was a bastard. Like many, like most, he quietly judged me then, quietly judges me now. I don't care. A fortune teller named Sarbuland once told me, Tum लंबी रेस के घोड़े हो, i.e., you are the horse of the long race. But I am not the same man I was yesterday.
You have a flavor now, and this is not an excitement or a pace or a magical opening of the unexpected, which is just at the beginning. It just continues throughout the novel. Is it on?
Yes.
Yeah. Can I be heard? Yes. So I'd said earlier that it sort of defies genre and it's subversive in more ways than one. So I'm going to turn to Christopher now. And Christopher, perhaps you can tell us a little bit about the provocative and very interesting glossary and HM's use of footnotes in a novel.
Well, you can hear from those first few pages how much exuberance there is in this novel and how much wit there is. And one of the things that you couldn't hear in that part of the reading is that throughout the novel there are these footnotes. For example, here's the last footnote in that chapter referring to the third rule that our hero is not supposed to break. Who remembers today that Cliff Richard was a native of our swath of the world, a neighbor, a Naqvi? Who remembers old Peter Sarstedt, for that matter, a Deliwala who wrote, "Where do you go to my lovely?" And Pete Best, the beetle from Madras, I ask you. This is sort of like Naqvi's novel, you know. I ask you, why doesn't discourse acknowledge that we pioneered rock and roll? And part of the project, I take it, in this novel is to remind the world of all the ways in which Karachi is actually the center of the world. And we get that in the glossary, where terms that come up repeatedly throughout the text are defined in, let's say, less straightforward ways than one might imagine. I mean, this really feels like Naqvi's novel. Because the fact... because the fact is that sentence by sentence, you have no idea what's next going to happen. And the delight of the journey we go on is literally incalculable.
This novel's genesis can be attributed to many dynamics, many anxieties I have, anxieties that we all have, a quest for meaning and, or lack thereof. But one of the dynamics that inform this novel is the genre of the minor autobiography. In our swath of the world, there are many who, towards the end of their life, are compelled to put pen to paper and not only chronicle their days and years and lives, but to also make sense of the world, and so in this way, and these volumes are inevitably self-published and distributed to friends and family, and they inevitably begin with a sort of, not quite a footnote, but figuratively a footnote that explains what compels them to put pen to paper. And so, since I'm invoking that particular ethos in the selected works, one footnote became another and another, and then I found that how nice would it be if we could all footnote our lives, and consequently the book features a few hundred footnotes. But as Abdullah, our intrepid hero, maintains in the first footnote, you can read the book without it. You don't need to negotiate the postscriptum on offer.
And I think the thing that I love about that, hello?
Hello? Hello?
Just trying to get some sound on this one.
Yeah.
The thing that I love about that is that in a scholarly text, you read the footnotes reluctantly, unless you are also doing research there. In this case, when I started reading the novel, I thought, oh, okay, so we're going to have these footnotes. And then I found them so compelling, and I realized that part of what HM is doing is giving us different kinds of narratives and different ways to imagine what this life is going to amount to. And the footnotes become just as delightful as the text itself. You don't worry about losing out on the text because the forward momentum takes different shapes, and the momentum is as much a matter of the language and the wit of the narrator as the plot, insofar as we can discern it.
So, other than the footnotes, which, as H.M. said, you can read the book with or without, and my way of reading was that I read every chapter without first and then with. I suppose because I'm also trained as a historian, so you can't miss the footnotes.
That's the difference between a poet and a historian.
Yeah.
I always go for the footnotes.
So there's also a glossary, which I think is rather delightful. So I'll read a few entries from the glossary, and I'll censor a few. So there's chota chota, small small, sometimes coupled idiomatically with mota mota, fat fat. There's chokandar, beta vulgaris, or beats can be used to denote color. And there's another che, which I won't say in this august gathering. Okay? He says you could translate it as asshole. Figuratively, it has the same resonance, but technically, it has to do with another orifice. Okay? So the book is peppered and layered with all of this. But for me, I'm dating myself now. I'm 68 years old, and my early childhood was spent in Karachi. And one of the things that I carry with me, and I think the book has touched me in so many ways, is the romance with Karachi. It sort of enters your bloodstream and gets under your skin. And it is really, in a sense, a hymn to Karachi as well. And how it goes through the various time scales and the people and the communities who lived in Karachi and who some lost and some who continue to live there. And the music of Karachi, the underground scenes of Karachi, the lost spaces or the spaces which very often people don't get to see. Now, I was trying to persuade HM to read another extract. And I think that, perhaps you, the audience, could urge him, because he did say to me outside, no, I will not. And, so please urge him to read a little more. HM,
You'd have to be louder than that. Karachi is unlike Lahore, a city a city that has a history that extends into antiquity. Lahore famously is founded by Lord Ram's son Law, some 3,000 years ago. Karachi's history extends back merely at best 300 years. But Karachi is demographically, nevertheless, culturally, socially, a fascinatingly cosmopolitan and complicated city. Like other cities that were sort of a function of the colonial enterprise, like Bombay or Shanghai, and so I thought, Abdullah obviously can be thought of an analog or a personification of the city. One could read the book in this particular way. The book begins with consciously invoking the sort of imperative to make sense of the sixth largest city in the world. It is said that cities are founded by gods, kings, heroes, but Karachi emerges from nothing, from stories. Indeed, one hears stories about Lord Ram's sojourn in the verdant cove known since as Aram Bagh, about the fag end of Alexander the Greek's bloody adventurism, about that lad Moriro who saved the coast with steely ingenuity from a monstrous rampaging shark. But the fact of the matter is, Karachi, like Calcutta, like Shanghai, was a modest entrepot when the Britishers happened upon it a couple of 100 years ago. Although although expelled on several occasions by the hardy denizens, the blighters were intent on seizing the environs by hook or crook, for the natural harbor promised great geopolitical potential. The community swelled from a few thousand souls in 1845 to millions today. You can fit the populations of Norway, New Zealand, Uruguay, Paraguay, the Republic of Congo at Brazzaville into the city on a good day and have space left over. Due to the great demand for cotton during the American Civil War, a railway line was laid here, and everybody knows that once you lay down tracks, the train of change barrels through. By the time our Empress Market became the second largest vegetable market in the world, my grandfather, a dry goods merchant, had set up shop here. Tea, tobacco, fiber, second-hand pantaloons, grafting our history onto that of the city. But I am more phenomenologist than historian, less concerned with who did what and what happened when, than with the more discreet, indeed noble investigations, nary the chota, but the mota. For instance, the mytho-poetic legacy of Abdullah Shah Ghazi, the patron saint of my city, is one of the matters hitherto ignored by historians, pundits, punters alike, suggesting a variety of perversity that eclipses the newsworthy issues that vex the denizens of our broad swath of the world. It is as if in this savage, insensible, this distracted age, we have become obsessed with anecdotal indicators, hermeneutic lint, ignoring what makes us what we are, indeed, what makes the world what it is. Consequently, I have been attempting to reify certain truths on the page, an endeavor that can keep me up from the onset of whiskey twilight to the baleful call to morning prayer that animates the resident cock, the murder of crows, until my piles are damp and sore, my extremities rosy with mosquito bites. When sleep eludes, my GP avers it has something to do with the circadian rhythms. I observe the local nightlife from my perch, from the transvestite troubadours chanting vulgar odes on the street to the cockroaches pressed like dried rose petals by my varicose feet. There have indeed been times when I have sensed daybreak only by the quality of light refracted through the dirty stained glass windows, spring by the flutter of hummingbird wings, but I am afraid I have also been waylaid by anxiety, lassitude, contretemps, and the intermittent shove of history here in the bosom of the vast, cluttered, famously custard yellow enclave known to all and sundry as the Sunset Lodge.
Thank you, H.M. Thank you very much. Now, Christopher, you've nurtured writers and novelists, and indeed you are a poet, so you will have an extra point of entry into this delightful novel, which often, in fact, invokes poetry in so many different ways. So would you like to say something about the novel as well as a genre?
Well, I had the good luck to be to watch the early stages of this novel, which H.M. wrote in the International Writing Program when he was in the program in 2010, right? And he had recently completed his first novel, Homeboy, which was a very poetic, albeit slam poetic, version of New York City. And it was filled with these syncopated rhythms, three Pakistani men, young men in the aftermath of 9/11. that was one world that he gave us in readings in Iowa City. And so when I received the first excerpts about this novel, I was completely floored by the fact that, okay, now he's done the same thing, the same kind of excavation work for Karachi that he did for New York, but with a radically different sense of poetics, of style. It's the book of a 70-year-old man with varicose veins and piles, which are described with some regularity throughout the book. we never forget the fact that his fat thighs chafe, and that the piles are continuous.
It's anarchy.
It's anarchy. But I thought the other night, H.M. and I were driving, and I was hoping at some point you might even read this section about the invention of jazz in Karachi. And I realized after the fact that he was telling the story of the invention of jazz, which he repeats almost word for word in the book. And what the book consists of are story after story after story that give us one version of history. It's a poetic version of history, and that version is endlessly delightful. So, and last night I heard Take 5 played by a jazz band here, and I thought, oh my God, it's H.M. talking.
I began this project in 2010. The first several pages I wrote one night around midnight. I was invited to a musical performance at Seaview, and this voice that I had been hearing talking to me for several months suddenly required me to transcribe it. And so I remember leaving this mehfil and this and returning home and writing, I think, the first 2 paragraphs. And those 2 paragraphs have not changed since. Subsequently, or soon after, I had been invited as a fellow to a residency in Iowa City, Iowa, and I was sort of not excited at first to leave Karachi, the sort of source of my material and the energy of the 6th largest city in the world, and travel to a quiet corner of the Midwest. But over the next 3 months, it was that quiet that perhaps allowed me to birth this novel. It was conceived in Karachi, but I think it was birthed in Iowa City, Iowa. And I had the good at first I was sort of completely out of sorts, but it was perhaps serendipitous and the way to go about things.
But can you say a word about your entry into Goan life via Iowa City? Because it's the kind of serendipity I think that writers depend on, right?
Karachi, in popular discourse, is associated with Urdu-speaking communities now, but one discourse doesn't acknowledge that Karachi was actually sustained by Gujarati-speaking communities for a good part of its history. And Gujarati-speaking communities include Khojas and Bohris and, of course, Parsis. Karachi was, at the turn of the last century, the municipal machinery of Karachi was populated almost exclusively by Parsis. Um, and
That too is how the novel works. It echoes and echoes.
But that, yes, exactly.
at the turn of the century, a great Parsi businessman was barred by the British for purchasing more property because he owned half of the real estate of Karachi. And um, amongst the old communities that sort of played an important role in the development of the city were Goans. The Portuguese were famously horrible colonial masters, and as a result, there was a Goan diaspora throughout South Asia. And Goans in Karachi, unlike Goans in other metropolitan centers, achieved this sort of status that they didn't in other parts of South Asia. So you had Goan administrators, Goan police officers, and Goans also brought music and jazz to the city. So when I was in Iowa City, I found it, and this. I drew on a lot of oral histories that I would conduct myself. And in Iowa City, in Iowa, there were no Goans to be had, no Goans from South Asia, and so I was in somewhat of a quandary. And again, serendipitously, the if I remember correctly, the night I had this anxiety about who should I talk to? Should I try to call people in Karachi? There was a book that I found outside my door in Iowa City, Iowa, which was a compilation of essays that I think Penguin did about Goans in South Asia. And, the IWP program has in years past hosted writers like Kurutalayan Haider, Orhan Pamuk, and Yo Man, the Chinese Nobel laureate, and all of them, I think, would remember a Goan professor of literature there named Peter Nazareth. And I had expressed this anxiety to Peter, and Peter dispatched this book.
So,
Peter's, sorry, Kata Kalami Maaf. Peter's cousin ran one of the most popular pop music radio shows on Pakistan radio. So there was Eddie Carapiet, if people
just
of
died
us,
recently. He died just recently.
who
last
I
month.
learned just died recently in Canada. He was in Surrey, I'm sorry. And his successor was Peter Nazareth's cousin.
Okay, so, but what I'm going to do is, and notwithstanding that he might sort of get peeved, I'm going to introduce you to a few more characters, okay, without saying too much about them. So there's a character called Jugnu, and I won't say who she is, but he says that the closest Jugnu and I are to carnal congress is the evening she arrives dramatically drenched. A passing automobile has splashed soupy water all over her low-cut, ruafsa-colored shalwar. I'm going to take a bath, she announces, after expounding topside on the idiosyncrasies of the plumbing system. The blue tap spouts hot water. Turned counterclockwise, I repair to the balcony to entertain randy fantasies. Imagine a sodden beauty quietly soaping by candlelight in your tub. Imagine, oh, just imagine. Okay? So, there, I think before we go to anything else, why Abdullah the Cossack?
I can talk about various facets of this novel, from its genesis to the more rigorous readings that lens that one can apply to this work. The only thing that I won't talk about is why the Cossack. It's you have to read to read it at least halfway through to understand why he was once in history called by Karachi society the Cossack.
I'm going to turn to you now, Christopher. And to you also, HM.
You're going to turn to us at the same time?
Well, I'm going to open a question, and it's actually about the craft of writing and nurturing writers and the strange character called the muse. So I think many people sitting here or elsewhere, the muse visits, but not everyone is able to actually have that encounter with the muse or bring it to fruition and make their work reach a wider public. So I think something about the craft of novel writing and something about actually how to get your work out in there, Hussein, HM, to, what was your journey as a writer? What was it that drew you to writing fiction?
I have been writing since since I was a child, since as far back as I can remember, and this imperative to put pen to paper is innate to me. And before I could form words, I scrawled doodles, and what are words but codified doodles. And so I have been writing ever since I remember. As far as the muse goes, muse visits me every 5-10 years. It doesn't visit me every day. I don't, and I wish she did, but it doesn't work that way. When you're working on a novel, you work like a carpenter. Muse visited me that night in August 2010, and was never to return. And since then, I worked diligently. I write 300 words a day, or that's my quota, but I usually exceed it. I usually hit 400-500 words a day, but I keep the quota low so I don't feel that I am behind. And so, like a carpenter, I hammer away every day on a construction that I quite don't have a manual for, and so that's a way that I would describe it. It's work. It's hard work. We can continue this discussion, or we can open it up to the audience, and we can
I was just going to ask Christopher to finish with something on this, and then we will indeed open it up to the audience, because I was just looking at the time.
Well, I would just say that the muse obviously visited you that night, and the extraordinary polish of every sentence is emblematic of the carpentry that went into the fashioning of this novel. I have a quick question, which is, did you have a sense, after you wrote those first couple of paragraphs, where the novel was going to go, or is that something you discovered along the way?
I wish I knew where I was going, literally and figuratively. I have sort of muddled through my life, much like Abdullah the Cossack, and I muddle through novels in a similar way, in that there is no outline that I adhere to. I allow the voice to speak. The voice suggests a character, and the character takes his first step and continues in this in with Abdullah lumbering and muddling through. About halfway through, I can sense an end, and it was about halfway through with Homeboy as well. But there are people there. There's Dan Brown, on the other hand, and perhaps on the other end of the spectrum, meticulously plots his work. And sometimes I wish I knew where I was going. But in life, I can only sense the end, mercifully.
So, actually, do you want to say anything?
I was going to say a question
Okay. Yeah. So before we go to the questions and answers, I would just like to say thank you, HM, for this fabulous novel. And ladies and gentlemen, before you ask the questions, before the questions, bravo. Yes, the lady there. We need a mic, please. No, because people at the back may not be able to hear. Is the mic not working?
It's working.
Can you hear me? Okay. The question is, the muse that you talk of, is it a recurring symbol? Is it the same muse that you talk, the muse who inspires you? Or is it something part of a racial memory? Something which you want to utilize in your genius, something that has been part of your racial memory, your growing up, your ancestry, when you use the word Cossack, that sort of a thing? Or is it just a figment of what you imagine, a beautiful woman, or what a muse is? How would you describe that, please? Because a muse is a very important aspect of writing, I think. You have to be inspired by something. So when you talk of a muse visiting you or appearing to you intellectually, would it be part of a larger sort of going back in time? Or is it a symbol, one symbol?
Muse is this is, in a way, it's semantic, right? You can...
What inspires you?
That's a question that perhaps I can fashion a more cogent answer for. Inspiration, as far as I go, is in the minutiae of life. Abdullah the Cossack has very large, lofty concerns, and is contending with a sense of meaningless and so on. But they're the small things in life, the whiff of perfume in a scarf, the quality of the breeze in February by the seaside, so
Whatever inspires you, sorry to interrupt, whatever at that moment causes that, how should I say, that productivity in your...
Sure. So
it's not a one theme. Anything can turn you.
I'm sorry, I'll have to stop you now in
sure.
this very interesting conversation because there's some other questions, please.
I'll just follow up with that. And yes,
Yes,
Proust Proust's decology, the remembrance of things past, is famously begins with the whiff of a madeleine, a cake, and that imperative sustained one of the longest novels in literature. And so it's these small things that that compel big stories.
Thank you. I'm sorry for cutting you short because there are a number of questions over there.
Right.
Yes.
A very interesting read, and congratulations on the book. Looking forward to buying it. My question is that would you like to reflect upon your idea of adding a glossary to your book? Because now when literature is so technically forward, and if we read contemporary writers like Nadeem Aslam, we are encouraged to not add a glossary because of postmodernist ideas and polyglossia and then chutnification. So what exactly encouraged you to, because students of literature are encouraged to interpret words in tandem with their understanding. So what encouraged you to add a glossary to your novel?
So that's an interesting question, and sort of, it's an academic question in many ways, because there are those who feel that English is English. We should have the license to shape English in our image, and so there has, and so on. I won't weigh in on that particular question. That's for academics to argue about. As far as I'm concerned, Abdullah the Cossack, the conceit of this book is that these are his selected works. And so the narrative is punctuated by essays and riffs on, say, the culinary anthropology of this region, and on thoughts on theodicy or the nature of evil, and an anecdotal history of jazz in Karachi, and so on. And so the conceit of this book is that these are the collected, the selected works of Abdullah the Cossack, and within that conceit, a glossary works.
There was another question.
Up there.
My question is partly about Abdullah's journey. And I know I read the book, the manuscript, a while ago, and I understand that it's changed. But what struck me was that this is a guy in a country that is so rooted in family, searching for family, or at least searching for a kind of family that is different from his immediate family, his brothers and his nephews and his, right? So I'm wondering, what compelled you to actually try and take apart the notion of the nuclear family and reconstruct it as a communal family that is different from that understanding? And I'm sorry, Hussein, if this is a bad question for you.
No, I would only expect a question of such insight from Framji Minwala, whose grandfather was a proprietor of one of the first hotels in Karachi, Hotel Grand in Malir. And of course, he comes from a great hoteling family. The Metropole has been also a part of the Minwala family's ventures and concerns. We, in this day and era, family as a construct has changed in many parts of the world, and it's changing in Pakistan as well. There is this freedom that is part of this emphasis that we place on individualism. And individualism is sort of great, and God bless those who place great premium on individualism. It didn't quite work for Abdullah the Cossack. His wanting to sort of be his own man and do what he wants to do didn't quite work. And late in life, he yearns for a sense of family, a sense of community, and perhaps it's too late.
Well, I think after that, what can we say? Except thank you all for being here. Thank you, HM. Thank you, Christopher.
Thank you both
And
for
thank you.
chatting with me. Thank you, everybody, for chatting.